Yeah, I haven't. Okay, yeah, now it should be live on all platforms. Then I guess we could just start.
Yeah,
Um, Thank you guys so much for showing up. It's
thank you.
last year when we launched Vibrant Creative for the first time, we had a live event in Norway, which was also called Entertainment is Entrepreneurship. And we had a startup lab with us, and we had Nico sorry, the musician from what is the group called? It's called Vincent.
Different
Yeah. And we had an actress and a couple of traditional founders, and we're talking about like the similarities and differences in entrepreneurship from the creative industry and in like tradition between and traditional entrepreneurship. And then we thought like after that we've also seen that the creative industry employs the most people between the ages of 15 and 29. 50% of the people employed are women. It's generating great profits, but it's not really like the startup ecosystem hasn't really embraced cultural and creative entrepreneurs the same way that it's embraced entrepreneurs from other sectors. So that's why we're also thinking this is an opportunity to cater to that group, that they're an underserved group. And it's also really interesting because the ring effects of entrepreneurship in the cultural and creative sector are they're so huge, right? Because they create obviously economic value, but also the values that are represented in our culture and in our societies. And you guys both are active in the cultural and creative industry in different ways, but I can introduce myself and then you guys can introduce yourselves. So my name is Stina, and I'm the co-founder of Vibrant Creator. I'm based in Norway, and I'm Ghanaian Norwegian. And now Vibrant Creator has users actually from 4 continents, so we're almost all over the world, but majority of our users are on the African continent and then in Norway. So that's a little bit about me. Takunda, do you want to continue?
Hey, so thank you, Stina, for allowing us to be part of this program and this initiative. Very exciting to always, to pick the minds of other people in different parts of the world. I'm Taku Chiweza. I am a young creative with a passion for business. I think business is simply my form of expression, and just sharing knowledge and working with young people to connect and maximize on our different experiences and see how we can map and shape the future of young Africans. So yes, I think I'm just a passionate individual with a knack for marketing and using my skills to network and build a community of young business leaders who are African and are looking to shape Africa in our own image.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I'm also Chumisi here. I'm Chumisi, and thank you as well, Stina. And nice to meet you too, Taco. So I'm also based in Ghana. I work in the creative sector. So I've done different creative stuff. I've done filmmaking. I used to be a filmmaker. Much recently, I work in the music industry for a streaming platform as a marketing manager there. And I also have a little startup that focuses on university students. It is a little content production company called Spark, and Spark focuses on bringing together a community of students to create content that they like, then express themselves on a platform. That is free. And then it can enable them to get careers when they leave school, and also give them some skills. So then I'm also happy to be here to share ideas with like-minded people and pick up on trends around the world. Right? Yeah. Thank you.
That's great. It's really good to have you both. And I was thinking maybe we should start by talking a little bit about, in your view, what are the specific and unique challenges when it comes to entrepreneurship in the cultural and creative sectors?
Right.
I think maybe I'll just start from our perspective here in Zimbabwe. I can't speak for Twumasi, but in Zimbabwe, I think we are, I wouldn't say culturally. I would say we are a society of a highly educated society, which has traditionally always been more geared towards professional pursuits. So, becoming a doctor, becoming a lawyer, becoming an engineer, following the traditional route that was the way in which was a sure way, a surefire way of a family being able to cover for its needs. Fast forward a couple of years from now, we are in a country and a society whereby there are no jobs. We have unofficially 95% unemployment. So there are no jobs, but the society has been trained and geared towards work hard, go to school, get a job, and this should work. This should surely work. But unfortunately, things don't work that way now. And where there are no jobs, you have to make your own job. So you find that a lot of people are involved in business. They are buying and selling goods. People are traders. However, there's a form of entrepreneurship that is lacking, in that it is almost like a business of the stomach rather than a business that is well thought out and well curated to be sustainable and to solve a particular need. So a perfect example, you will find 10 people selling tomatoes next to each other, right? Because it's just a business of the stomach. So these are some of the cultural trends that we see in Zimbabwe, and it's great now to see a new generation of fresh and young minds who are coming up with cool and vibrant ideas that are penetrating the market. But across the board, this is typically what you see.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because I think also what you're saying about unemployment driving people into necessity entrepreneurship is a phenomenon that we see all across the world, but especially in developing countries. And it's, as you pointed out, it makes the businesses reactive rather than proactive or intentional, right? So you end up in these situations that you feel like a little bit like at the mercy of the surroundings. And I think this is also one of the things that really inspired me when I joined, or when me and Ivan started talking about developing Vibrant Creator, because there's a lot of potential there. For some of them, there could be large potential for development, and they have great ideas, and they're solving unique problems in their own society and their own communities, and ideas that could be scaled and copied and implemented other places. And for some, they should rather be employed, but there's no employment, right? But we also really wanted to build a structure that could help people who fall into entrepreneurship by necessity or by chance to actually kind of learn the business strategies they need to learn, and kind of like have that backing so that they can make the most of the situation they're in. So I really relate to what you're saying there. What do you think, Twumasi?
I think and we have a similar issue here in Ghana as well, where there's like a cultural barrier, because I mean, as he said back then, the parents wanted their kids to get into the formal careers, the ones that have more security, doctor, lawyer, pharmacists, stuff like that. So, I mean, that case over the years, you don't have, like very, very learned people, get into the entertainment industry and stuff like that. So then you would also find that as a result, it's always been like a test for people who probably didn't get some form of education and just want to be fed or try and do something in it, which is also good. I mean, that means that over the time you don't have the top expertise in the industry. So like you go to maybe banking and you have like the top talents in like a year group in university, you go to like medicine and you have top talents. You don't also get that in the entertainment industry as well. So that means that there's a lot of raw skill and expertise in it. And that's how to grow the industry faster, because then you don't have the top expertise in it. I mean, that is, That is one issue that that we have culturally. Another thing
Mm,
in terms of like support and stuff, the government here, doesn't really see entertainment and culture as worth investing in. I mean,
mm,
the government and prioritizes some other key areas, So then, funding and support for the entertainment industry is very low, which means founders in it, usually have to bootstrap with their own like funds and try and
mm,
businesses. That's expensive and that takes more time, you know.
mm.
So then, and over time, we don't have a lot of institutions that have come out of the entertainment industry as well. So those are the two main issues that we face here
Yeah.
in Ghana as well. Yeah.
I think also, I think it's across the globe, you see that creative industries and new businesses in the creative industries are underfunded. They receive less than 1% of total investments, although they actually generate more than $300 billion a year. So I think there's definitely like a disproportionate, I mean, the disproportions are quite big, even though you can say, okay, they don't generate the same profits as, for example, tech, but
Yeah.
then at the same time it's hard to compare when they don't get the same support. And investors, actually, they say that they see investing in the entertainment industry as something more risky and more unpredictable. But at the same time, I think that can relate to the fact that maybe our funding models aren't actually adapted to founders in the creative industries.
Very interesting that you say that, because I don't know how it is. I think Twumasi, Ghana has got a very large music industry,
Yes.
and it's also, I think, also in the film space, it's
Yeah.
quite large. But I think also, when you look at governments and their approach towards the entertainment space and the arts and the creative spaces, I'll give you a typical example. I think some of the failures that we find are maybe based on the failure of our governments to regulate in those spaces. So, for example, those governments would be able to recoup more in taxes from that industry rather than it being an industry that it is contributing to. These industries could actually contribute to government coffers, but they don't look at it that way,
Yeah.
unfortunately. However, if you come to a typical African country, if you are in the middle of the street, you will find a guy with walking around with 50 CDs, pirated CDs of local artists, local musicians who should be feeding their families through the proceeds of those CDs. So now your local African artists, majority of them, are forced to only subsist on the revenue that they make through shows.
Yeah.
Selling the actual record stops being a meaningful form of economic contribution. So I think, yeah, if we look at how we perceive the role of music, even as an export, and in Africa, I think our arts and culture are one of our biggest exports. If we look at it in that way, maybe the governments will see this as more of a something that they should invest in more for revenue rather than being a cost center for them.
And I think also there's a huge generational gap in this, because you still see like they call it, or some people call it geriatricacy, or that basically the people in power are from a different generation, right? And they might not value or even identify the opportunities, or even understand actually the immense amount of export of music from Africa in the last year alone, And so I think that obviously these power structures that have been in place for so long, they're just not flexible enough to actually deal with the shifting tide of society. But I thought it was very interesting. One of the reasons actually why I started a dialogue with you, Twumasi, was what you were writing about the music
Yeah.
industry on Twitter. And you were comparing the factors of production and the marketplace in the music industry to other industries. Could you give a short presentation of what you said?
Yes, yes. So basically the background of that is that a lot of the music fans in Ghana, usually have a difficult time understanding the streaming platforms and how it works. That's also built on the background that streaming is a fairly new industry generally. and it is more developed in the West and in Europe. Over here in Africa and in West Africa, we are just new into it. So then people, both artists and the music fans don't really understand it. So then I took time to try and break it down. And I thought and because you usually find experts and from other industries, complain about, yeah, well, why don't our artists become big on streaming platforms? They don't make good music. So I wanted to use a familiar industry of manufacturing and then sales. So then you go to the supermarkets. So then you have the big um, corporations in Africa, Unilever, Nestle. They produce like the products that you see in a typical grocery shop or in the supermarket. They also control supply. They control production. They have the funds to also invest in advertising. So then in that sense, um, when a buyer walks into a supermarket, you are bound to buy their products over another product that doesn't have the funding to invest in like marketing, supply, and advertising. And that's the same in music as well, where the bigger record labels invest in musicians and they own their content. And because they own their content, they also invest in marketing and then promotion on the streaming platforms. So then people usually think that, they just discovered a song on a streaming platform and they have a good music taste. And I usually try and tell them that no, actually the music was placed there for you to discover it.
True.
And then that's what puts, like a big label artist ahead of an independent artist, usually. And the song is being engineered for listeners to discover it, and that puts them ahead because when the music makes money, the labels make money and make business. So then it was just I tried to draw both parallels and try and let people understand it in a basic form.
Yeah, I think, and it's when you say when the music makes money, the label makes money, but also the investors make money, right?
The investors make money here.
And but another question: who are the typical investors in labels? Who invest in labels?
I mean, it's very difficult to say, but then there are mostly finance companies now. Now we know that, for example, banks and stuff are also diversifying their investment portfolios and then put into labels. There are also fairly rich people who like media and advertising music and then culture, who want to invest in it. And the point is that you don't have the very typical investors, who send their money to other industries like tech going into music, but then it is more, sort of like gates kept, so there are few investors as against other industries that have a wider, you know, bunch of investors in it. Yeah.
Yeah. But because I was thinking about it earlier today, if we think about the maturity of the market in the creative industries, we haven't kind of developed the same set of ecosystem that you have kind of for other startups and emerging businesses, right? We don't have like when investors say that they feel like it's risky to invest in in creative new businesses. I'm also thinking, but do we have risk assessment models that are appropriate for these new businesses? Because I'm thinking, like, when you think about how much entertainment impacts and is impacted by the current situation and current society, the society around, right? You have to have like a pestle, for example, analysis. Kind of how does this form of entertainment fit in the political and social framework that it's supposed to be shown in, right? And and then I was also thinking, because you have some key players, you were talking about the difference between independent artists and like label artists. And I'm thinking, in an immature market, you would say, okay, you have a lot of independent artists, but you maybe have some big companies or big labels that take like a huge part of the cake, right? But if we're thinking now that this market is going to mature, well, do you think we're going to see more hope for independent artists and independent productions in general?
Um, yes, yes. I think I'm even in Ghana that the market is like maturing at a first rate. Yes, independent artists stand a chance of being noticed by the big investors and the big labels. The one thing about the music industry too is that it is incredibly good at reinventing models to fit the creative mindset and expectations. So, for example, independent artists don't want to sign with labels now, because there's a perception that labels are businesses that will end up cheating
Mm,
you,
mm,
cheating out of your money, making profits off you,
mm,
So, so the music industry now has distribution companies. Um, Distribution companies are primarily those who distribute the music from the artists to the music platforms, to the streaming platforms, and these distribution companies give advances to the artists, and so then they give them licensing advances to distribute their music. Now, the funny thing is that it's actually the big labels that are investing in the distribution companies to give money to the artists. So even though artists think they are not signed to labels, they are signed to distribution companies, which are
mm,
financed by labels. So
mm,
then the music industry is pretty good at adapting, changing the model quickly, to be able to appeal to independent artists.
mm,
So I think that's a good thing, because the industry is quite progressive at being able to adapt and being able to appeal to you
mm.
know young artists. So as the market develops, we'll also be seeing very very new models,
Yeah.
that's a get
And
independent
I also
artists.
think that, yeah, we'll also see, I think, a lot of innovation on streaming, on kind of distribution, right? Because that's also, I wouldn't say gatekeeping, but that's also like one of the or that's been one of the big challenges for creatives in general, how to distribute your product. You can
Yes.
produce what you want, but how do you get it out to people? And especially, for example, for in the film industry as well, because if you can produce a film, but I mean obviously it takes a bigger budget, but then how do you get it to people? And I think now with anyone could basically publish anything with, for example, access to YouTube. But the problem or the challenge, I think, when it comes to when we're talking about the economics of it, is if you don't know how to profit from it, if you don't know how to build a business around it, then as an independent producer, you won't survive. It's going to remain a hobby. It can't become your occupation, right?
I think rightfully so. When you speak to and just going back also to the point that you raised earlier when you're speaking about the maturity of the market, so to speak, I think rightfully so. I, a market really is composed, and I think more driven by the consumer more than the producer. And when you look at the African market, I think one thing that we struggle with is that you can make content, but our content, because we are 51 independent states,
Hmm.
um, our content tends to be very localized, very specialized, which means automatically you've limited your reach. Whereas when you look at big artists, these international artists, you look at the Beyonces, the Jay-Z's, etc. Their content is spanning across the US, Europe, it's consumed here in Africa, it's consumed in Australia. So that commonality as well, not even necessarily packaging ourselves to the rest of the world, but packaging African music and having that commonality amongst African music, where we've got and it's great that it's emerging now that Afro beats is becoming an African sound. It's now transcended the borders of where it came from, but it's become an African sound,
Hmm.
whereby there's similarities and that content can be consumed across the board. And one African artist in one corner of the continent has consensus amongst the African populace. So that's quite interesting to see. And also, just going back to that point of even in necessarily not just looking at music, but even in film, how exportable is our content. How relevant is our content to the stories and the lives that people are living in other spaces. So it's great to have localized content, but I think the stories also need to be relevant and be shared amongst our market so that you've got a bigger audience, a wider audience. So in curating the art, it's also important to look at the business side of it as well and think that, fine, I want to make this great artistic product, but who am I going to sell it to? I live in a country where there's 15 million people, right? Compared to a country like South Africa with 55 million people, and yet more Nigeria with a larger populace. So the numbers speak for themselves.
I think that's a really good point. And I was also thinking about when we kind of compare cultural and creative entrepreneurship to other traditional forms of entrepreneurship, we talk about like, obviously, every time you pitch, you have to kind of also pitch your scaling potential. So when we talk about artistic productions, how would you kind of describe the scaling or assessing the scaling potential of a creative startup or a creative new business?
Well, one thing, and this is the thing I'm always fighting with us Africans about sometimes, we enjoy copy pasting solutions, which are not based on the environment and the realities we live in, right? So I think one of the initial things that you need to immediately look at is that, fine, what type of artist am I? What is my audience? Who am I speaking to? And then secondly, this is now the real African part. What is the capacity of my audience to compensate me for this product? Right? Um, we all understand the context in Africa. Majority of the populace would rather spend their money on ensuring that their child has books and food and lights over their head than in using their actual hard-earned cash on contributing towards forms of art. All right. So you actually need to look at find the majority of your listeners. Who are they? Are you going to be a high-end niche product? Are you going to be a mass product? If you're a mass product, who's actually your end financier? Who's actually are you then going to go the sponsorship endorsement route? Because that's likely the person who's going to fork out the real dollar for what you're producing. So I think in terms of assessment, you need to see, okay, fine, what do I have to offer to the market? Who am I speaking to? And who's going to put the dollar in my pocket? You need to look at all of those factors holistically and see, where am I?
Yeah, I think, but when I hear what you're saying, I'm just thinking about, okay, so for example, on the Vibrant Creative platform, we have customer segmentation, right? And this is exactly what you're talking about. And I think sometimes some shifts, because I think for a lot of artists, honestly, it also needs to be a shift of mindset to actually start thinking about your productions as your product, right? Your business. And so you need to also start, instead of using, for example, the word audience, you also need to start using the word consumer. And it's just because it creates like a simple shift in mindset, and then you start asking the questions of who's actually paying for this, because it's also what we see and what the opportunities are now is, okay, a lot of streams, right, are funded by advertisement. They're not funded by the actual consumer. And I think this is also is not necessarily beneficial to the artist, but it can be a means to an end, right?
Yeah.
And so I think these are maybe the innovations that can help us unlock access to, or yeah, to enable more independent artists and more up and coming new businesses. And it's also a business idea in itself to actually find creative ways of financing that also externalizes some of the costs, right? I think that's if you can hack that, like even look at what Netflix did. Like it's been years and years. Of course, it's not a new company by any means anymore, and now they're in big trouble, right? But they've made themselves a key actor in this market, and they've had almost a de facto monopoly. And it started with just like renting out movies, like as a movie rental service, and but they managed to find out how to. I mean, they directly charge the consumer, and now it's also a question of, okay, is that enough, right? So can we stop here, or do we need to incur more? Like in order to produce more, they also need to have more money, right? But now the conditions are so bad, people are striking. And so it's also like a question of, okay, but if you don't want to scale anymore, you could have kept the product the way it was, or if you also have to kind of set some targets and figure out uh, or to figure out how you can get past the next step, or just kind of say, okay, we're going to rest here for a bit and we need to innovate on the business model itself, not just on the product.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to get lost. The problem that I think entrepreneurs generally, real entrepreneurs, are somewhat in the entertainment space because you're creatives. Creating a business, creating an idea, creating a dream is it's a form of art in itself. And sometimes I think we get carried away or we get lost in the creative process that we forget to go back and look at
Yeah.
the fundamentals, which I think is what happened with Netflix. Having quite a large budget on the internal production that they did actually as well. So getting excited about let's produce, and forgetting that wait, there's a wage bill that I'm racking up against my revenue. So yeah, that is something I think possibly we sometimes fall victim to, and as an entrepreneur, you need to just keep that in mind and just know that this is just one of the chinks in the armor, but it's part of the territory.
Yeah.
Mm.
No, but I think there's definitely a lot of work to be done for the infrastructure for distribution. And I think that has a major impact on how many people can succeed as a creative entrepreneur. Because the way it is now, it is very gate kept, as you said, Twumasi. It is, you need to kind of be admitted into to the club to be able to be an entrepreneur.
Yes, yes, yes. I think it goes back to the conversation that we're even having before the talk started. About the fact that traveling within Africa is expensive. I think we have that issue too. Where distributing content, within the continent is, it's just as equally cumbersome. It's difficult. So for example, how does a producer in like Ghana, start a partnership with like a producer in Zimbabwe or like a TV network or something of the sort? Once we don't have those sort of partnerships in the continents, then everybody works in a cell, and that's exactly what Tack said. Around the content ideas are very localized, because then we don't have like a cross market approach, towards, so then I guess that's also the challenge where, how are we able to build a distribution funnel within the continent or within the regions where, people could easily, reach at least, another market. That's a good start. One market is enough. You know, we know the continents have, the regions are close. So, for example, in West Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, share a lot of cultural similarities. In Eastern Africa, Tanzania, Kenya share, the Middle Eastern countries too, by like languages and culture. So that's a starting point, but that's also the bigger division because then West African stuff stays in West Africa, Northern African stuff stays in Northern Africa, East African stuff stays in East Africa. So then, how are we able to build, so like a continental supply system, in a distribution system that favors everyone. That's the conversation we should be having as well. Yeah.
Very interesting point, Twumasi, because I think about your typical movie you would watch in Hollywood,
Yes.
and you would see an artist boarding a bus from the East Coast and driving up through to the West Coast. And then it's just as simple as packing a bag and a guitar, and they travel like that. In Africa, it's
Yeah.
not so much the
It's not
same.
that easy.
Where's your passport, my friend? So, these are some of the realities that are on the ground, and also reminds me of something very interesting I was watching the other day, which is the music competition that they hold across Europe, which is Eurovision, and the design of that is to share, sometimes of bizarre forms of the different culture and the different forms of artistic expression that are exhibited across the continent. And I think in a space like Africa, that might be something of interest because I the most I know about West African music is Burna Boy and Sarkodie, but there's so much more to it that I could learn. There's so much more to it that I don't know about. and it's just due to a lack of exposure. But I think more of our audiences should be able to know that this is a Ghanaian norm, this is a Nigerian norm, this is a Senegalese norm, and yeah, we shouldn't be strangers in our own backyard.
That's one thing, but I also think even more so, it's like, okay, we see huge artists coming out of Nigeria, for example, but why doesn't that open the door to more, right? And so I think that's a bit of the issue that I'm having, that I'm seeing, okay, but like, and I'm not putting the responsibility on them, but it's like, why is this considered like a unique case rather than kind of an indication of that there's more to pick up, more to discover. But I think a lot of it relates to, as you said, Taku, the consumer-driven market, and then it becomes it becomes nobody's responsibility basically, and it's up to the individual consumer. And I think it also, like, that means, maybe, I think, from my point of view, anyways, that the most important innovation that can be done on this field might be actually kind of, um, first of all, like, also regulations and support systems. But I think that, like, we need maybe more, like, more crossover between, for example, different streaming services, right? And also a little bit, I don't know. Actually, I'm not sure. That's what, I guess that's what we're trying to figure out. But I think it's like, because I'm thinking now, I'm a huge podcast fan, and I've also, like, dabbled in podcasting and stuff. And I was never kind of intent on actually making the podcast that I was doing profitable. But what I was thinking is that, okay, we put it on, like, the all the platforms like Apple Podcast, Spotify, and SoundCloud and stuff, and then all of that is free, right? And people have access to them for free. But then I see also, like, especially the last 2 years, a lot of podcasters have migrated from free platforms to paid platforms, or they have additional content for their subscribers on Patreon, right? And that's obviously a positive thing, that the podcasters can actually make a business for themselves in that way and increase the quality and everything. But I think it's the frustrating thing is, if I want to listen to three different paid podcasts and they're on three different platforms, then I need to tie my subscription to three different platforms, right? Then I prefer the Patreon model. But and that's why I'm saying, I feel like maybe there should be different types of collaboration between the different streaming services, because at the end of the day, for me at least, I end up subscribing to none of them because it's hard to decide, instead of subscribing to one of them, and then they could have shared some profits with the other ones, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Go ahead, Twumasi.
oh, sorry. And when this comes to that, I mean, it's a similar case in film, because back then, if there's a big picture, you can just go to the cinema and then see it. But now you see a trailer or something and it's on maybe Netflix, but then you have Amazon subscription, or something of the sorts. So then it is very hard for audiences to make the choice. I mean, it feels like it is free and you have the choice, but then really, the platforms are using the exclusive model, to like have higher content, high quality content, which also requires you to pay, and you have to also dedicate your time to, because they all make money from investors when they
Yeah.
have more watch user retention. When people spend a lot more time on the platform, that's when investors are give them more money. So then having the content exclusively, it's important, to the platform, but then doesn't really give the audience, or the consumer in this case, the freedom that they need. So then I can relate to that. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very crazy about this idea, and you'll hear me talking about it over and over again. Is the market? So where I come from, if you are listening to Spotify or have anything to do with Apple within your mind, you're actually quite well off. And majority of the music is still consumed on radio. It's downloaded from a friend's phone. It's because again the data cost, right? There's the cost of data to still stream and consume that content. As much as you have it, there's that cost, there's a subscription cost. There's all types of barriers that I think exclude quite a significant part of the population. Maybe even 80% of the population might be excluded just by those means. So from an investment point of view, or even just from a producer point of view, you kind of want to take those points into consideration. So infrastructure, I think, is also another thing to look at within the value chain of what's being done. That, of course, there's the niche market, and that is a significant portion, and there's the African diaspora, and there's the majority of the world that can consume the content. However, also there's this big chunk of 80% of the populace which may not be able to actually consume and enjoy your content as much as they might even like to, or they may not. So yeah, how do we enhance our broadcast facilities? Or is there a new type of technology we can be investing in? How do we get that out there? So this is again where the governments come in, and this is where they need to be lobbied to be able to create that infrastructure, to be able to create the cinemas he was talking about. If I'm a local film producer, maybe I'm not on the internet. Maybe I'm not even a film producer. Maybe I act in plays. Is there theater in my community for me to act in? So I think back to grassroots again. If we're going to look at it as an industrial continental growth spurt of the arts and culture sectors.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think these are very good points. And I was discussing with a friend of mine who works for an organization in South Africa and their goal is also like to buy enough African movies and also sell them to the European market. But like their biggest challenge is actually to get them shown in Africa and to kind of distribute them to African viewers. And I think it's a huge issue because, it's just, first of all, it's just a little bit disparaging if you're a filmmaker and you can't show it or your neighbor is never going to see your movie, right? And then I think it just facilitates brain drain as well, because in order to get success, you have to go abroad, right? Or your project has to go abroad. And I think there's also even like old school ways or old school infrastructure systems maybe that you could use in different cases. For example, like Bluetooth transmission and like these kind of like things that we don't really think about so much anymore, right? Because we've supposedly advanced, but we could have used this to transfer files and different things. But I think in terms of infrastructure, it might not be a question of creating new things, but of creating good synergies, right? And when it comes to like kind of being or making things profitable, it's also like I think it's also interesting to find out or work more on how to externalize costs to third parties, because it's at the end of the day like we have so much access to free things now. So it's also like even if people can afford things, like me for example, I still wouldn't pay for it because I'm used to getting everything for free, right? I can watch YouTube for free. I can go on social media and stuff, and it's all because of advertisements. But I think what part of the issue is that people don't really understand the purchasing power that lies in the numbers of the poorest people on the continent or in the world, because we're talking about millions and millions of people. And so if you're Coca-Cola or if you're Nestle or if you produce basic services that everybody needs, then you still have a market in that place. Anyways, that was just my 2 cents. But actually, when we've talked now, one thing that I keep asking myself and that I'm wondering, and I would like to hear your thoughts on, do you guys think that this is a golden moment kind of to push entrepreneurship in the creative industry?
I think this is maybe the most important time. You've heard the age-old fight that goes on in the world about cultural appropriation. This is where the entrepreneurs in the music and in the cultural space, in the creative space, need to protect and capitalize on what's theirs, right? So particularly in an African space, where you've got these sounds, you've got Amapiano, big sound, you've got Afro beats, big sound. this is the time where um, African African production labels, music labels, need to be owning the sound, owning
Mm,
the right,
mm.
you know, pushing the narrative, pushing their artists before the sound is captured. Because if you're slow, it will be captured, and the
That's
next thing you know, there's 100 American artists playing Afro beats, and the sound just becomes beats. You know, so,
right.
yeah,
No,
we
it's
need this is the time.
It's a very good point, and it leads me to two thoughts actually. Because first of all, I just wanted to let you know, yesterday was Constitution Day here in Norway, huge party day, right? And I was at a club, and then I just hear like these Norwegian people are shouting, "Piano, piano, piano, piano," and they want to hear about Amapiano, and most people don't really know what it is, but they've gotten to know like, oh, it's Amapiano. They have no idea it's from South Africa, and they're just like, oh, it's similar to techno, and the rhythm is so clear that even I can dance to it, right? That's kind of the gist behind it. And I'm obviously super happy that it's so big and stuff, but I think people don't even understand what they're listening to. And then the second thing that I wanted to say was that, oh, oh, I lost it. No, but I think no, that's what I want to say. That I also think one of the major kind of obstacles that for people actually succeeding as creative entrepreneurs are the lack of knowledge and skills and resources to navigate intellectual property laws and management of
Yes.
intellectual property. But what kind of support system can you guys imagine that would enable creators to own the rights to their products and their brand, not at least, right?
Yeah. I think it's an expertise issue because but it goes back to the point I made earlier on that most of the people who join the entertainment industry are not, well trained, well educated, or professionals in that
Mm,
sense. So, for example, in Ghana, lawyers, for example, don't want to do entertainment law because it's not profitable, and when I've had a challenge trying to convince some lawyer friends of mine, hey, jump into entertainment. It's good. The country here, it's most maybe divorce law, land law, stuff like that, criminal law that money is in. So then that's the issue. So for example, for most creatives, they don't have the support system or the expertise to be able to navigate these issues. And the
mm,
foreign companies, that they come with money, creatives need the money, they would easily trade off their property, because there's no local support system to be able to guide
mm,
them, you know, to also give them the support and advice that they need, And so, so we have to think through some models in Ghana here. How do we need to have institutions to be able to pay the experts, for
mm,
them to run these services, for the business for creatives. The other challenge is that at least creatives being independent usually don't want to pay. They don't want to pay a lot for like legal services and all of that.
yeah,
So that leaves them at a very
vulnerable.
fortunate, yes, and then vulnerable space. So, as an industry, we need to think through ways that we could also support them by bringing in the expertise from other industries,
Hmm.
and to be able to support them as
Hmm.
well.
Actually, I think this is very interesting also because if I back to what I was saying about that we need to maybe change the language about how we talk about creations that from creators. I think that if you don't have secure your IP rights or you don't have intellectual property, you will also be registered with fewer assets, right? You don't have so much tangible ownership, and then you also become less investable, right? And so I also
Yes,
think that kind of if we change the framework of how we talk about it, we will also make these businesses more investable. But obviously, the route to get there, as you described, is very complicated. Actually,
yeah,
I talked to someone who worked at he works for the government of Uganda. I can't remember exactly which department, but they were launching like a tech solution to IP management in Uganda for creatives. I can find back to what he was working on, and I could put the link in the description at least, and I can send it to you guys so you can take a look at it. It was very interesting because I mean, obviously, this is not something new. This is not something that we're discovering in this conversation, but it's complex, and I think a lot of lawyers are also scared to actually touch it because it's so intangible, right?
Yeah,
Yes, yes,
I think the answer to this one, and I don't know, I'm sure it's been explored already. If it hasn't, then give me a call and give me some shares in the company. Um, but I think the answer to this one really lies in modern technology and is being exploited, I think, in the art space more than it is in the music space or in the visual space. And that's simply the NFT technology. I think it's been exploited exceedingly well. I've seen quite a few African NFT marketplaces where African artists are actually selling their pieces and making good Bitcoin on that. Haven't seen it so much used in the audio space. However, I think this is something that we are underutilizing, but it's there for the individual artist to actually own his music, own his art, own his or her creative effort and get something back for it themselves. So I think the technology for it is there. Adoption, of course, it has not been so high because it's an evolving and developing technology. But I think in the future is looking good for African creators because you can really control really your own narrative and the rights and the ownership of that property.
Mm.
yeah,
No, I think maybe that, yeah, I completely agree with you though that there are definitely technical solutions to this. And especially, I think it becomes increasingly important with the emergence of AI, for creative
yeah,
use. And, but yeah, it's still complex, I think, because the law will also change, and then you have to kind of change technology as well. And how does the law impact technology, and vice versa? So I think we might hopefully see a lot of movement in this, because the more we move, the more we learn. At least this is, I wouldn't say unexplored territory by far, but I do think a lot of people are actually scared to touch these
yes,
yeah, these issues.
I beg to ask the question to both of you, and this is just on the note of copyright. Does anyone know how Ed Sheeran won his case?
No.
I hear he played the chords at the
Yeah,
court in
it's
the
very
court and then
similar, but I don't know. It was very similar, but he seems to have won the case. So
yes, yes,
I
yeah, he
don't
won
know.
because I saw an interview by um a professor, a music professor, who said that that line has been used for years, even before the Marvin Gaye song. That was the main point of reference in the case. So then it was a marketplace, it was a general marketplace
Mm.
use. So then it wasn't unique to that sound.
Mm.
So I guess the jury, they understood it from that point of view and then let it go.
Mm.
Because from a legal perspective, that sets a precedent.
Of
So I
course.
think as an entrepreneur or as a musician, working in the creative space, yeah, it's probably something to consider and find out about.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing also, but I mean, as a lawyer myself, I think it's the issue also becomes when you start penetrating different markets, right? Because how does IP rights kind of migrate, and how do sounds migrate, like when it's not of your own volition or accord, right? So if something is exported, I wouldn't say against your will, but if something's being exported without you having any say in it, and it would be an infringement in a different setting, then how do you deal with that, and where does it yeah, which law to apply? And this is obviously an issue mostly for distributors, because they're the ones that enables that track, for example, to be played in a different jurisdiction. And then I'm thinking that also raises the bar for the distributors. And so the question is, if I don't know necessarily to what extent or level of detail you should wish for increased protection of, for example, a certain composition of chords, or like, you know what I mean? Because obviously ripping off a whole song is different than ripping off two chords, or you know what I mean? Where do you put the limit? Like, what is actually an identifiable, or what is the kind of essence of a song that should be protected about, and what can be kind of you should expect to be used again, right? And also when it comes to, like, let's say for example in the audible space, when it comes to sayings or trademark actually sayings or expressions, or like actually kind of trademarking language, like how can you deal with that? I think
It's the
design.
same case as Lady Smith, Black Mambazo,
Mm,
and In the Jungle from The Lion King. I
yeah.
think, and I don't know if they won that case or not. I don't remember, but that was I think the exact same kind of scenario where the Awimba way was something that they said this is public information. So
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
I
I
think, sorry, yeah. So I was going to say that I think in our African culture here, we have a lot of like like phrases like that, which are in like pidgin languages,
mm,
stuff like that, used more here than in the Western world, that
mm.
has unique languages, and so I guess and those kind of laws need to be adapted into our cultural setting. Yeah.
Hmm. No, of course. And then it's also like, can you capitalize on, or it's also hard to kind of prove who came up with it first, And for example, if something's written in a book, can you cite it without citing it? Like, if it's just an expression, like I think there are many issues that might, I mean, I think at least like I wouldn't want to kind of increase the threshold for using good language, but at the same time, I think it's the most important thing with good IP legislation is to make it predictable for everyone involved.
Yeah.
And I think we're not there. It's not predictable right now. So I think that's kind of where we need to, or that's an area that needs to be emphasized, especially with
yeah,
the businesses around it.
when a law is subjective, it's difficult to enforce
Yeah,
because it's up
yeah,
to what each one of us three thinks. Yeah,
exactly.
there is no right and wrong. There's no black and white there.
Yeah, and then I think also like both professionals and lay people alike, they feel scared to touch up on any issue. You know what I mean? And then you can also miss out on great creations because people didn't dare to actually push it. And then it becomes also like a question of freedom of expression and many other things that we won't get into today. But I think it's very interesting, and it's maybe an under, I wouldn't say underexplored, but like it's something that I think also creators kind of sense that they don't know, they don't understand, but it takes so much energy to actually learn about this that you're kind of, you don't really want to learn about this, you just want to build your product, and then this is kind of seen as a distraction, right? And it's also, we want people to be able to do the things that they're good at. They shouldn't have to become an IP expert just because they want to release a song, right?
Yeah.
But then I think, like, I agree with you, Taku. The time is ripe actually to kind of build up ecosystems for creative entrepreneurs the same way that we have for other entrepreneurs.
And I also think just maybe if our conversation today is anything to go by, um, I think maybe entertainment on this continent can be enhanced by us widening our focus.
Hmm.
In this conversation, we've more focused on music and the visual art space. Maybe
Hmm.
touch a little bit of of painting, etc.
Yeah.
But entertainment really has a really wide range, and I don't think we've invested enough in our entertainment culture, so to
Okay.
speak, as just a whole vibe, as a whole thing. It's like they say when you go to the NBA game in the US, it's more of theater than it is even watching the game. There's the halftime show, there's
Yeah.
the competition, there's the kiss cam, all that stuff. That's entertainment. It's a holistic environment, holistic vibe. It's many different elements. It transcends just music and movies.
Yeah.
So yeah, we need to open our eyes a bit more to what else can we explore in the entertainment space, and what do our people like?
Hmm. I agree.
Sports. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's extremely important. And I also think that we need to enhance and broaden our definition of who's an entrepreneur. And I just wrote a blog post on this last week, actually. Not just entrepreneur, but like most people actually don't define themselves as an entrepreneur, but as a founder or a CEO. And I think it's also like maybe we need to be direct also with entertainers that what you're doing right now, you're managing your own, you're the CEO of your own role, like whether you're a stand-up comedian or you're a singer or whatever, because I think it's also like something that people think that it's a title that has to be deserved, but we have to then kind of make people realize that they already deserve it just by virtue of trying to push their product, right?
Yeah.
But I'm seeing the time is up, but it was great having you both, and I
Yes,
feel actually very
great.
inspired. And I'm happy to have you both on board as partners. If I didn't mention that to the audience before, hey. So that means that we'll also be keeping in regular contact, and
Yeah,
we can have more of these sessions.
Thank you so much,
definitely.
Stina. It's good to know
Thank
I've now got a brother in Ghana, and that we can
Yes, yes. It's good to
share
have
those with.
Uganda. Yeah. Nice to
Yeah,
meet you. That was really, really
Only a pleasure. Only
fun
a pleasure.
talking to
you
you.
guys take care.
All right.
Okay,
Thank
so
you so much. Cheers.
thank you so much. Bye.